Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dursey-Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio chapter of APA, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, February 21st. We will be hearing the presentation, Creating Equitable Cities Through Gender Mainstreaming. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in your webcast toolbar. And for your content questions related to the presentation, you can type those in the same chat box in your GoToWebinar toolbar. We'll answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. If your question is for a particular panelist, please state so in your question. Today's sponsor is the APA Women in Planning Division. You'll hear a little bit more about them from Caitlin here in just a minute, but thanks to them for pulling this together. You always host great webcasts for us, and we appreciate you. Coming up on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts. We have a lot down the pipeline coming. A lot of folks chapters and divisions are getting sessions into me now. This is going to be a super robust year. I'm very excited. So be sure to sign up, click for these upcoming webcasts. And you can see when you head over to our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planning webcast, you're going to see these different tabs here up at the top. So the prior webcast tab, which is the second one, I feel like I'm going to be saying this for the next couple webcasts because I don't think I must not be telling people about this. The prior webcast is where we list all of the PDFs from our prior webcasts, and you can get prior years PDFs as well. The distance education tab, I'll explain in a second, but just so you know, we do have distance education options, and that's where you can find them. And then our questions box, if you need my contact info, if you have questions or ideas for a session, just hit that tab and you can email me or give me a call. And then our members tab, which isn't totally updated yet because we're still getting our members in for 2020, but you'll be able to see all of our chapters and divisions that participate. Today's webcast has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing only. To log those credits, head over to planning.org, log into your My APA account, and then you can either search for the title or the event number, both of which can be found on our webcast webpage if you don't get a chance to jot it down here now. And we do have, like I mentioned a moment ago, we do have a few recorded webcasts that are available for distance education, law, and ethics. So feel free to head over to our website and you can view those for free on demand. And like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel. On YouTube, we have over 300 videos, over 2,100 subscribers, so please be sure to join us. And lastly, we are recording, like I mentioned, today's webcast. So head over to our YouTube channel at the conclusion so you can grab that link and share it with anyone that you think this might be useful for. And with that, we're going to do a few introductory polling questions just to kind of gauge who's here with us today. And then I'll turn it over to our presenter. So I'm going to go ahead and shift us over. So if you want to make sure that your screen is active so that we can do these polls here. Sorry, folks. I'm trying to get my screen to work. Sometimes technology just doesn't play nice. Hold on one second. Here we go. Okay, let's launch this first question. I'll get back to our first question in a second when I can pull it back up. So if you want to go ahead and answer this polling question, have you ever experienced harassment or violence in a public place? I'll give a few seconds and then I'll close it and show those results. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it and show those results now. There we go. Okay, so we can see that many of us have experienced harassment and violence in a public place. Okay, I'm going to go ahead on to our next question. Does your city's comprehensive plan give specific attention to the needs of women? I'll give you a few moments here to click on that. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close it up and show those results. Okay, so the majority of those that are on the call don't uh, give any specific attention to the needs of women, but it sure does look like that there's a lot of folks that also just don't know if it does or not. I'm going to go ahead and hide this, and we'll go to our next one. Have you ever heard of gender mainstreaming before? So we're going to go ahead and launch that one. If I can get it to work. There we go. Great. So go ahead and click on that. I'll give you a second. Okay, well, to our panelists, you have your work cut out for you because the majority of folks on the line today have not heard of gender mainstreaming. So we're going to go ahead to our next question. And this one might be hard for some of you to answer just because you're not familiar with gender mainstreaming, but does your city incorporate it into practices in the planning process? So I'll give you a second to answer that one. Okay, similar to the results of our last question, the majority just aren't really sure, and some that do know, they know that know they don't, and there's a very small percentage of um, plans or incorporating gender mainstreaming into practice. There's a small group that does, in fact. I'm gonna hide this, and this is our last question, which is actually our first question that I couldn't seem to get up before, and this is if you could just identify your gender. And then we'll kick off the presentation here. So go ahead and vote there and we'll be right back. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and close it up and then share those results. Okay, the majority, it looks like, are female. Coming in second is male, and then we have some trans-binary and preferring not to answer. So everyone, this is who's on the line today. This is what we know. This is our baseline. So I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to get today's discussion going. Caitlin, I'm turning the controls over to you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in today to our webinar, Creating Equitable Cities Through Gender Mainstreaming. So today we have a wonderful list of panelists. We have Dr. Sherry Ryan. She is a professor of city planning at the School of Urban Affairs in San Diego State University. Her research focuses on active travel monitoring and planning, transportation, land use interactions, and the influence of land use patterns on travel behavior, physical activity, and health. She has published numerous articles on these topics in journals such as Urban Studies, Transportation Research Record, and the Journal of Planning, Education, and Research. She has participated in multiple funded research grants from such agencies and foundations as NIH, Caltrans, FHWA, and the Walton Family Foundation. In addition to her academic experience, she brings significant practice experience, having served as project manager for multiple local and regional bicycle and pedestrian master planning efforts, including the award-winning San Diego Regional Bike Plan, the City of San Diego's Bicycle Master Plan Update, and the Carlsbad Pedestrian Master Plan. Her joint academic and practice careers have allowed her to develop a professional foundation of great breadth, part exploratory research, part nuts and bolts, planning practice. Next, we have Dr. Petra Doan, who is a professor of urban and regional
Caitlin, I'm just
planning.
going to interrupt you real quick. Can you click the show your screen button just so because I know that there's pretty faces of everybody. Is it showing for you?
No, it is not.
Okay, hold on. Let me try doing it one more time. Okay, now give it a whirl. Just because I know you have faces to there's everybody's faces.
There's everyone's faces. Excellent.
Perfect. Okay, continue.
Okay, great. Sorry about that, everybody. So next we have Dr. Petra Doan. She's the professor of urban and regional planning at Florida State University. She has a master's and PhD in city and regional planning from Cornell University and has worked both internationally in cities like Jordan, Egypt, and Togo, and in the U.S. context. She just finished her term as the president of the Faculty Women's Interest Group and the Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning. Her broad research area explores the experience of women in her city. Her particular research focus examines the relationship between urban planning and the wider LGBTQ community. Most notably, she has edited 2 books, Querying Planning, Challenging the Heteronormative Assumptions and Reframing Planning Practice, published in 2011 by Ashgate, and Planning in the LGBTQ Communities, The Need for Inclusive Queer Space, published by Routledge in 2015. She also has published a number of related articles in Gender, Place, and Culture, Women's Studies Quarterly, Environment and Planning, and the Journal of Planning, Education, and Research, Progressive Planning, and the International Review of Urban and Regional Research. Last, we have Claudia Galicia. She's a senior manager with the Board of Relations Department and Office of the CEO at LA Metro. She has been with the Metro for 13 years and has been a public servant most of her career. Prior to joining Metro, Claudia worked at the LA Central Library. In her current role, she manages the Office of the CEO's budget and leads special programs, including the Women and Girls Governing Council and its various initiatives, one of them being Understanding How Women Travel Study. Ms. Galicia holds a BA from the University of California, Los Angeles, and is a graduate of LA Metro's Leadership Academy. Claudia is a true LA native, and when not at work, Ms. Galicia can be found spending time with her son, often cheering on their local baseball teams, the Boys in Blue, or watching Pixar movies at home. So those are our panelists today, and the outline for our presentation. So first we'll discuss the origins of gender mainstreaming in Europe and the historic perspectives in the United States. From there, we'll discuss how women interact in public space, women and their relationship to mobility, Claudia's LA Metro study understanding how women travel, gender mainstreaming and how it relates to the gender nonconforming community, and what can we as planners do to incorporate this in our daily practice. So with that, I will pass it off to Sherry.
Great, thank you so much, Caitlin. Super happy to be here. 25 years ago in 1995, the United Nations convened its fourth World Conference on Women called Action for Equality, Development, and Peace. There were over 30,000 people at this conference, and they produced a document that is still alive today, the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action. Over 189 UN member states agreed and signed on to this document. The document, the Beijing Declaration, outlines objectives and actions in 12 critical areas related to women's empowerment: poverty, education, training, health, violence, armed conflict, economy, power and decision-making, institutional mechanisms, human rights, media, the environment, and the girl child. So this declaration was really a landmark statement on women's empowerment and gender equality. It is widely appreciated for still continuing to guide the global struggle against constraints and obstacles to the empowerment of women around the world. Next slide. Shortly thereafter, the United Nations Economic and Social Council met, and they adopted a report of the Social and Economic Council, which outlined the concept of gender mainstreaming really for the first time. And I'll just take a minute to read this so that we're all on the same page here. Mainstreaming a gender perspective is the process of assessing the implications for women and men of any planned actions, including legislation, policies, or programs in all areas and at all levels. It is a strategy for making women's as well as men's concerns and experiences an integral dimension of the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation of policies and programs in all political, economic, societal spheres so that women and men benefit equally and inequality is not perpetuated. The ultimate goal is to achieve gender equality. And so I think there are a few key takeaways. There's two key takeaways from this definition. One, that gender mainstreaming is very broad in scope, intended for all levels of government and public organizations, all spheres of society, political, economic spheres equally. And the second important point is that this definition is really pointing to a concept of substantive equality, meaning that we're not necessarily looking for equal treatment of women and men, but more importantly, we're looking for equal levels of benefits. So we're looking for equal levels of benefits in terms of outcomes. How are men's and women's experiences resulting from policy decision-making, from funding decision-making? How are their experiences equitable or not? And so we're very much focused on outcomes in this realm of gender mainstreaming. So the UN continued its efforts over, since 1975. In fact, they have been having or convening follow-up meetings to review and to assess how well the Beijing Declaration is being implemented. And so as a result of one of these follow-up meetings, there were actually 4 in 2000, 2005, 2010, 2015. As a result of some of the earlier follow-up meetings, the UN Women was established. It's an entity for gender equality and empowerment of women. And it really highlights and shows the dedication and the commitment to these issues. One of their flagship programs is related to data collection. And so there's a deep understanding in gender mainstreaming efforts that we need to be collecting disaggregated gender data if we're going to be able to understand how women and men experience environments differently. So this is a critical component of gender mainstreaming. Next. Interestingly, one of these follow-up meetings is being held right here in New York City at the UN headquarters. It's the 64th session of the Commission of the Status of Women, and it again is focused almost entirely on assessing the progress globally that has been made towards the implementation and rolling out of the Beijing Declaration. So this declaration is very much alive, being tracked, importantly, with data at a global scale. Next. In advance of this meeting, which is taking place in March next month at the UN headquarters in New York City, a very interesting report has been published that talks about, what is the current context, what are we facing in terms of women empowerment and gender equity, and it highlights a look back at where we're at and what we've accomplished in the 25 years, and really underscores some of the current contexts that are challenging or particularly presenting an opportunity. The economic model that we're currently in, which is focusing benefits in a small elite minority and is a challenge for gender equality and human rights. Conservative forces that are instigating regression or backsliding in gender equality is highlighted in this report. A militarized peace and security agenda that excludes women from their contributions towards peace. Gender in the environment analysis is not being integrated meaningfully in policy frameworks. The digital and data revolutions could provide some hope and are something that's changed over time for sure, and is changing the landscape of opportunity for women. And then the last bullet highlighted in this report is how the young intersectional feminist movements across the world literally are expanding and invigorating pathways to gender equality. So really important document, just to underscore the point that the UN has been working on this issue for decades, since 1975 when they first held their conference on the status of women, and that there's tremendous opportunity for us in the US to be a part of this movement, and I don't think at this point that we're fully taking advantage of that opportunity. Next. Now, going from the United Nations to the European Union, the European Union also has a long history of addressing women's empowerment in a way that I would argue we don't quite find here. And so I think there's a looking to the European Union, what can we do better? Their 2000 Charter of Fundamental Rights, Article 23, equality between men and women. Equality between men and women must be ensured in all areas, including employment, work, and play. The principle of equality shall not prevent the maintenance or adoption of measures providing for specific advantages in favor of the underrepresented sex. So again, a reference back to this substantive equality. We may need different policies targeted towards the underrepresented sex to bring the sexes up to an equal playing field. So there's an acknowledgement that they're potentially not starting at the same place, and that we need to focus on outcomes. How are we experiencing in all realms of society our world? And if it's different, we need to try to get to the bottom of those differences. The European Union has adopted 30 pieces of legislation in the past 40 years focused on gender equity. In 2006, they established the European Institute for Gender Equality, specifically focused on gender mainstreaming policy development and implementation best practices. Next. They have, for example, developed a European Union-wide gender equality index that measures equality between men and women across 6 arenas: power, money, health, knowledge, time, work. Next. And the most recent reporting on this gender equality index in 2017, reflecting 2015 data, the Institute for Gender Equality is not very thrilled with the pace of equality. And I think there's probably general global sentiment that we're not making enough progress, that we're making progress at a snail's pace. This index is ranked 1 to 100. On average, in 2005, the European Union stood at 62 out of 100. 10 years later, they stand at 66 out of 100. So not a lot of progress. Some of the countries showing up very strongly are Sweden, Denmark, Finland, the northern Scandinavian countries, showing up very strongly in terms of achieving gender equality. Even though things are not moving, admittedly, quickly, I think it's important to look to the European Union member states for their very strong institutional structures. And so you see gender mainstreaming integrated very specifically, purposefully in almost every institution. And so you see agencies like the Swedish Gender Equality Agency, the Danish Minister for Gender Equality, the French Service for Women's Rights and Equality between Men and Women. At the city level, you see the City of Vienna Department of Gender Mainstreaming, the Swedish Association of Local Authorities and Regions, which is a regional agency or a national agency focused on helping cities integrate gender mainstreaming in all policies. So you see these very strong institutional structures. Next slide. And that leads us to, what are we doing? What about gender mainstreaming in the United States? I would argue that we're not as far along in some senses as a European country or the United Nations that's looking globally at this, but I think the planning profession in particular is incredibly well positioned to absorb up and to start from the ground level, from the local government level, talking about gender, talking about the planning process and every stage of the planning process and how we think about gender, how we incorporate disaggregated gender data, and how we evaluate and monitor the outcomes of our planning efforts. And so I think the built environment is an incredibly ripe arena for really motivating discussions across the US about gender mainstreaming. We asked you a few questions in the beginning, and back in 2015, Women in Planning, the American Planning Association issued a planning brief, an issue brief about the need to plan for women. And so we repeated some of the questions, and I was super, I think we see some of the same trends, but back in 2015, if you look at table 3, 94% of communities have comprehensive plans. Yes, great. Does your community's comprehensive plan give specific attention to the needs of women? 98% said no. Okay, so here is our opportunity. Here is our opportunity in the planning profession to ignite these discussions. In table 11, back in 2015, is there a culture of gender conscious planning in your community? 83% disagree. Is the Planning Zoning Board aware of the different planning needs of women? 87% disagree. So I think we're not doing much better now here in 2020. When we asked this question of, full 400 people, 432 people are now on the line, 70% said flat out no, 30%, 29% responded, I don't know, to the question about, is your community's comprehensive plan giving specific attention to women's needs? So clearly this realm, this professional realm, is ripe for planners to focus their attention, and on focusing their attention on this 50%, clearly 50% of the population that women represent that are not being adequately reflected in planning process. All planning, all built environment efforts are going to raise up. And this is the argument of gender mainstreaming.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Sherry. And with that, we're going to pass it off to Petra, who's going to discuss how women interact with public space and maybe some of the differences between genders.
Great. Thank you, Caitlin. It's really nice to be here. First of all, I want to do just a terminology check because sex and gender are words that sometimes get confused, and we're talking about gender mainstreaming. Sex is really a narrow definition of maleness and femaleness, usually basis of physiology, but often in the literature now we're using a term called gender, and I like to go back to Simone de Beauvoir. Sex and gender are not synonymous. Women are made, not born. How is it that women are made? How is it that this gendering happens to women? And I would argue, and the reason we're doing it in this webinar, is that women are in part gendered by the cities in which they live, because the cities are gendered as well. And that's what I want to talk about in the next set of slides. So next. So in the 19th century, there were very strong divisions between the public and private spheres. Men were sort of in charge of the public sphere. It was productive. That's where the workplace, streets, public buildings, neighborhood layouts, that was all public sphere. Men were in charge. They were producing things. The private sphere was where women were supposedly in control. It was the space for reproduction of the labor force, having kids, etc. It was domestic space. Except men, you know, a man's home is his castle, so it's the woman's space as long as the man isn't in it, and it gets complicated. And women in public spaces can also be quite complicated, because, you know, what's a nice girl like you doing in a place like this? Is the sort of stereotype. What are women doing in public spaces if they're not just being, if they're hanging out, if they're having a drink in a bar, they must be looking for something linked to vice or licentious behavior. Women are perceived as passive and must be protected. Men are perceived as combative and aggressive. And so this public-private, men-women distinction is sort of baked into how we are still thinking about things. Let's go to the next slide. So in 2009, the Journal of the American Planning Association celebrated the 100th anniversary of the first American Planning Conference that happened in 1909. In 1909, they talked about the planners were all middle-class Protestants, well-educated, late Victorian social norms from that 19th century stuff. There was no discussion of race, gender, or sexuality. There didn't need to be. All of the planners at that 1909 conference were white men. So there's a limitation in sort of focus. In a review of JAPA's most influential planning books, Linda Dalton in 2009 noted that in all the books that were listed, gender, poverty, and race were not discussed. So even in the canon in which I went to graduate school, and maybe some of you studied as well, the books that we read from are all written largely by men. Next slide. So Jane Dark wrote a very powerful piece called The Man-Shaped City. And she's one of a number of people who write about the ways in which cities themselves are, in her quote, "A settlement is an inscription in space of social relations in the society that built it." That is, the social relationships that exist in society get baked into the city. Cities are patriarchy written in stone, brick, glass, and concrete. So that our cities in some way are gendered because they're all planned, they were all laid out, they were all conceptualized by men. So part of the task of gender mainstreaming is to sort of unpack that. Next slide. Jackie Levitt in 1989 said that, you know, there's a real problem. Women are not in the planning profession. In the 1950s, less than 10% of planners were women. About 15% of planners were women in the 1970s. The response to that, in part, was the creation of the APA's Women in Planning Division in 1979. That's why you're all here. This is our sponsoring group. In the Academy, the Faculty Women's Interest Group was created in 1999 because a couple of senior women looked around and said, there aren't any women in the Planning Academy serving as faculty or certainly as full professors. So there's a problem both in the fact that planners are not women, but the academy is also dominated by men. That is changing. Certainly, you wouldn't find at Florida State, we've got 55% of our students are women, so it's changing. But as we can see from the discussion of gender mainstreaming, it's still not coming into the planning interest. Next slide. Dolores Hayden, back in 1981, said cities are sexist in the way they're laid out because they reflect the values of the people who laid them out, and that makes them sexist. Leonie Sandercock and Ann Forsyth have argued that planning theory has to cope with the fact that public spaces are heavily gendered. Mirren and Young said the same sort of thing. Boundaries imposed by the gendered city constrain the way women can move through the city. So we're going to talk later about transportation, but the gendering of the city creates a set of artificial boundaries. And I'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Next slide. So let's take, for example, gendered public facilities, bathrooms, if you will. Access to toilets, freedom of movement. One of the ways that gender constrains movement is that we all have to use the facilities at some point or another during the day. And if you can't pee, you can't get out in public. In the 19th century, there were no women's public restrooms. Male planners assumed women would stay at home. In the 20th century, we have sex segregated spaces. These are the relics of this gender discrimination, but they're highly, highly gendered. Next slide. We haven't gotten there yet. I mean, there are now facilities for women, but the whole potty parity question is still very problematic. The built environment is a material manifestation, according to Daphne Spain, of a patriarchal society. That means that, yes, women and men have the same bathroom, but because the biology is a little different, women's needs are not adequately cared for. Anybody who's gone to any kind of public event knows that, and women particularly, there are huge lines for the women's room, and the men go breeze right in and out. Partly that's because they use urinals, but partly it's because women have different needs: gastrointestinal, reproductive, urological problems. Women may be menstruating, women may be pregnant and need more time. And so if potty parity does not mean the same number of physical toilets, it may mean that women simply need more time. But the planners never thought about that. So this is an example. Next slide, please. We might be thinking about gender-specific needs. In a stall, why don't we design a place to put a handbag? Why don't we design handrails? Because a lot of women won't sit on a public toilet. Well, do men think about that? Well, if they're handrails, it's much easier not to sit. And why on earth do we have these bathrooms that have, big gaps under the floor and big gaps in the door? Women perhaps need more privacy even from other women. So these are gender-specific issues that this is just an example of the way the patriarchal decisions about what's going to happen in space gets baked into how we think about what is a planning question. Next slide. There's also what is referred to as the paradox of urban safety. Women have much higher levels of fear about violent crime, but are actually, for the most part, less likely to suffer a violent crime in public than men. Now, this is partly because men are told they don't need to be afraid, so they go into places where it is more dangerous and they suffer more violent crime. But this notion of the perceived lack of safety has a strong effect on women. In a way, this is the way the patriarchy conditions women, genders the city so that women don't feel as comfortable moving through spaces. Anastasia Lukatos Sedaris talks about LA residents and public buses, and she did some survey work of them and found that women were very concerned about lack of safety at bus stops, but were much more comfortable on buses. Gerda Weckerle and Witzman have talked about the fact that women are very sensitive to signals of danger, whether it's some sort of graffiti or unkempt buildings, broken windows, and become uncomfortable in those settings, whether or not they should be. Again, Anastasia found that women feel much safer on a bus than waiting at a bus stop, because on the bus, you at least have a kind of authority figure, the bus driver, who might be more reassuring. So women's ability to even access public transportation may be conditioned by their concerns that it is not a safe environment. Next slide, please. So this is an example, again, from one of Anastasia's papers about transportation settings in Britain, where men and women feel unsafe after dark. For women, it's unquestionably walking through a multi-story parking structure, followed by waiting on an underground station platform, train platforms, undergrounds, bus stops, etc. These are very high levels of feeling unsafety. Contrast that to men. It's, about a third are uncomfortable. Men don't seem to be as concerned about parking garages and really aren't concerned nearly as much. 20% are about traveling on a train or a bus. So there are constraints that are built in because the way the stations, the way the garages, the way the vehicles themselves are laid out does not make people feel safe. So ridership is diminished. So in gender mainstreaming, we have to think about how is this perception happening and how does that affect decisions about how structures are going to be built, how they're going to be designed, and then, are they well lit, and a variety of other questions that we don't have time to go into now, but perhaps in the questions. Next. I think that's my last.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you, Petra. So next, we're going to jump back to Sherry, who's going to discuss women and mobility issues. And I think if we look at the image on the screen, maybe a couple women can relate to the crazy order in which you have to commute to and from. So Sherry, over to you.
Great. So thank you. And I think Professor Doan laid an excellent foundation. Mobility is a very important theme when we're looking at gender and equity. I think mobility and the need to travel brings up several important topics. Why do we travel? Why does anyone travel? Why are we mobile? Why do we need to be mobile? We need to be mobile to access opportunity. So it is the mechanism through which we have access to opportunity. It's very important, access and control over resources, which over and over again we're seeing is not equitable between genders. So if we look at the realm of mobility, there are very interesting questions that arise. Also, we don't travel because we like to travel. Mobility is not the means in itself, or travel is not the means in and of itself. We are mobile so that we can access opportunity. The other dimension of mobility that is interesting in relation to gender mainstreaming is that it does require us, in most cases, to be in public spheres. I think Professor Doan has done an excellent job of showing us we could look anywhere across our city environments, public and private, and see ways in which women do not experience those environments and do not have equal access physically in those environments. Another aspect of travel is well documented that men and women's kind of household activity requirements are different. Their caretaking responsibilities are different. Women are doing almost half as much or twice as much household activities, almost twice as much caretaking. And those activities are reflected in a reduced amount of time for leisure and sport. So very strong quality of life implications for women's and men's use of time. In the realm I work in long-range bicycle and pedestrian planning, again in San Diego, and I refer back to how we look at space public spaces, how we look at the outcomes. If we think about bicycle planning, local governments are going through a long-range planning process. They're making policy decisions about the infrastructure to plan, design, and build. As Professor Doan pointed out, if women are not involved in that process, that perspective is left out. And I would say that that is certainly the case in the realm of bicycle planning, if we look at a place like City of San Diego, almost 90% of the infrastructure out in the public realm across the city consists of painted bike lanes or signed facility that provides no separation from moving vehicles. And lo and behold, who is using those facilities? 83% are men. On a typical day in San Diego, only about 17% of the cyclists out there are female, and over 80% are men. And so if we're looking at an outcome, this is the kind of outcome we need to assess. But we need to address this outcome way back in the planning process, and I'll get to that later in the presentation. Next. If we look at it, another scenario, a different environment, one that is more that is removed from moving vehicles, moving cars, say an open street event that was held in San Diego. Look what happens to the rates of cycling by men and women. Women want to participate. But they're only going to do so if they feel comfortable. So an open street event, we clear out the cars, we don't let traffic there, we let the street be safe. And a clear 45% of women participate, much more equivalent to the rates of participation of men. And so we create an environment, and we will see outcomes that reflect more equity. And then we look to a place like Denmark. Their cities are well known for their strong networks of facility that separate cyclists from moving vehicles, so you don't have to interact with moving vehicles. In those contexts, in those environments, even more women ride their bike than men. 52% on a typical day in Denmark, 52% of the cyclists are female. And so the point here being, we can look at many different realms. We can look at bathroom design. We can look at streetscape and ask ourselves as planners, are the outcomes equivalent? Is the experience equivalent for men and women? Do we have equivalent levels of access to the infrastructure we're building, to the spaces that we're creating?
Great, thank you, Sherry. Now we're going to pass it over to Claudia.
Thank you. So I'm here to talk about what LA Metro is doing in the space of equity and gender mainstreaming. And as some background, in 2017, LA Metro created the Women and Girls Governing Council, and that's 60 employees who get together every month. And these are employees from all the different areas of the agency. So union employees and non-union, people with lots of years of experience, people starting out, and obviously people from different departments and even different divisions, because LA is such a big place. We have locations spread out all over the county. And we felt it was important to get people to get together and collaborate and explore our policies and determine where we can make improvements with, looking at everything through a gender lens. And so the idea for understanding how women travel came from the council, and specifically the focus area within the council of Metro as a service provider. And next slide, please. So the group did research before coming to the conclusion that that was their proposal to understand how women travel. And they found that 1.3 million trips happen on Metro, 54% and 52% of bus riders and rail are female. So it's a slight majority, but it is a majority. And women depend more on public transit than men, so maybe that's part of why it's a majority. You know, they don't have a choice. They don't have a car or whatever the reason may be. Next. And so Metro collects a lot of data for its different projects and different programs, and internally we surveyed that and figured out that even though, well, A, sometimes they don't collect gender when they collect the data, and secondly, when gender is collected, it's not separated by gender in order to analyze the disaggregated data. So it's just not used to plan in an equitable way for women. And we also found that Metro does not have enough information. Next. So with all this data gathering, the group determined that their recommendation would be to suggest, a study of understanding how women travel, and why it's important for Metro to know how women travel is because we want to bring visibility to women's transportation needs and travel patterns, identify the barriers and challenges, and shift from gender neutral planning to gender responsive planning. And the way to do that is by gathering the data and analyzing the data and ensuring equitable outcomes. And really, we feel that when you improve something for women, you improve it for everyone. Next. And so this is the approach that we took for the study. It was a pretty short study. It took us about 8 months, and there was a lot to look at. But this is, we had some academic partners do a literature review. We looked at existing Metro data, so we actually had our consultants disaggregate it and analyze it and see what kind of trends they found. And they also looked at household travel survey data. But then we also wanted to do some innovative methods of engaging the community to really get more into the why, not just answering questions on a survey of how you travel, but why do you make these decisions. And so some of that included, participatory workshops and pop-ups. And then we also had staff go out and ride the buses and trains and just observe how women behaved, because, sometimes you might not realize that you're doing something and maybe not answer a survey to reflect actual behavior. Next slide. And so here you see a map of the county and the system. You see how large it is, and we chose to do our data gathering throughout the area, again keeping equity in mind. And so the pop-up locations were selected based on high transfer activity, and also just to spread it out throughout the county. And so the difference between the traditional methods of gathering data and innovative methods is just that we wanted to be more qualitative and engage specific populations, uncover revealed preferences, and just amplify the perspectives of hard-to-reach riders, people who might not have access to a survey, might not be able to come in and participate in a focus group, and people that we just otherwise wouldn't engage. Next, please. Here's an example of the tool that was created for the participant observation. And so things that were observed was, where women might want to sit. It was mentioned earlier that women feel more comfortable on a bus as opposed to waiting for a bus, and we found that to be the case as well, and they choose to sit closer to the driver because maybe that makes them feel safer. Next, please. Here's just another example, participatory workshops. So we were very we were intentional about the groups that we chose to engage with via this method. And so we held a workshop at a Center for Disabled group. We held a workshop with a group of LGBT or non-binary people, as well as a group of people who have experienced, women rather, who have experienced or are experiencing homelessness. Next. And here you see just examples of the pop-up engagement. So again, it was high transfer activity stations, and we just kept it simple because you're probably just walking past in a hurry to get your next bus or your train, and just ask the question, what makes your ride difficult and what would make your ride easy, and gathered that data and analyzed it. Next. The online surveys, we oversampled for women, and we aimed for representative sample by income, race, and ethnicity. So you see the statistics there. We also wanted diversity in age and diversity in transit use. We, of course, want to hear from our riders, but we also want to hear from people who have ridden in the past and have decided to no longer ride. We also want to hear from people who have never ridden and have never really given transit a chance, and why that is, and how can we get somebody to try it. Next. Here's a map again of the county, and you can see the respondents by zip code. We just really tried to be as broad as we could and get as much data from the region. It's a very large region, and I would even say that the people who use our system are not all within the county. People travel from LA County, live outside of it, or people come from other counties and come into LA and work. So, those kind of borders are sort of irrelevant in this case. Next. Here's some more data about the focus groups and the themes. So we did a focus group with women in English, one in Spanish, and we also did a focus group with men to, again, just compare and contrast and see what kind of themes rose to the surface between the two groups. So the overall trip making patterns and trip chaining patterns, women, again, as mentioned earlier, do a lot more of the household activities. They have to care for the children, take them to and from school, sports, maybe do the grocery shopping, and so all that is rather difficult to do on public transit. We also heard about why they choose to ride or choose not to ride, and we heard a lot about safety and security, and again, earlier was mentioned, the perception is different than actually experiencing an incident, but it matters, and it matters in the decisions that people make on how they travel throughout the city. Next. So the report, which by the way is available online, very detailed report, lots of data. We gathered the findings and organize them in these categories you see here: overall transit behavior, travel behavior, transit behavior, safety, access, reliability, convenience, and comfort. I will not go too far into it, but I will share a few details. Next. So here you see average trips per day for women living in LA, and it's, the average is about 3.5 across all modes, so including driving and or taking transit. But what stood out to me is that more women than men make 7 or more trips, and also more women than men make 0 trips. So lots of hypermobile or immobile, and that could mean you do not have access to an opportunity, or maybe you don't have access to getting health care if you're immobile. Next. Women make multiple short trips, like taking children to school or other activities, and household serving trips account for 62% of women's travel trips compared to 54% of men. I would say that I sort of question that 54%, but you know that's what the data shows. Next. You see here that women also have a midday peak, a higher midday peak compared to men, and you see that more men have a car available than women do. So women are more likely to live in a car-free or car-light household. And oftentimes, if there's only one car in the household, the man has priority to use it. Next. Here you see some statistics on the perception of safety during the day and night. So women in the dark blue feel relatively safe during the day, but it drops, you know, pretty significantly after dark to only 21%. And waiting is a lot lower than riding transit. Next, please. So access and the way we defined access for the purposes of this report is financial access, and also just do you have access to a car and access to transportation. So 80% of women who responded to our onboard survey earn less than $35,000 a year, and median household earnings are $16,623. So across all types of transportation, low-income women report spending more than higher-income women. Next. So here you see some dollar amounts, and this is unfortunate because, you know, low-income women have obviously less resources and then end up spending more, and that could be because maybe higher-income women have subsidies provided by their employers. But another thing we figure is that lower-income women are not able to afford the upfront cost of a monthly pass, which would essentially give a discount. Even if you qualify for a low-income discount on the pass, it's a big burden to pay that at the beginning of the month and be out of $75 that you might otherwise need. Here you also have some statistics that a lot of complaints come in by women in relation to strollers. So it is very difficult to ride transit, specifically buses, because you have to take your child out, fold the stroller, and board the bus, as well as pay your fare while carrying a child in a stroller and potentially other things that you might have. So there you can see that significantly more of the complaints were from women than men. Next. Convenience and comfort. So fewer than 40% of riders feel that transit is comfortable, female riders that is, and that transit vehicles have enough space, and you know, it's clearly illustrated there, what I was mentioning in the picture. Next.
Great, thank you so much, Claudia. Next, we're going to jump just very briefly to Petra, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the ways that maybe gender mainstreaming falls short in accounting for the population as a whole. So, Petra?
Sure, and I'll do this quickly because I really want to be able to be responsive, and all of us want to be responsive to your questions. So really, the whole reason we do planning is to protect the health and safety of the population. There's an emphasis on order and safety. Leonie Sandercock, though, asks a very important question: who is the subject? Planning has to work with people who are all very different. Let's take the case of LGBTQ individuals, and particularly my particular interest is trans people and non-binary people, who ought to be part of gender mainstreaming but rarely are. The LGBT population is at great risk of violence and discrimination. Next slide. Just very quickly, the National Coalition of Anti-Violence Programs does an annual survey. This is from 2009. I looked at the 2014 and the numbers weren't much different, so I didn't put this up there. But you can see public transportation. Violence happens to LGBT people on public transportation 3% of the time, the public or street area 20%, workplace 15%, public accommodations like bathrooms and other places 6%, and really only a small percentage is in private residences. There's a real problem here with violence. Let's flip to the next slide. I'm trying to do this quickly. Particularly for trans people, there are problems in bathrooms. This is a survey done by Jody Herman, who found that both male to female, female to male, and people who identify as non-binary or genderqueer have reported very high levels of denial of access, verbal harassment, and physical assault in bathrooms. Bathrooms are very problematic places, not just for women versus men, but for somebody whose gender isn't quite what's expected. Next slide. So I think what we need to do is think about how might we redesign bathrooms. This is a very controversial topic. I'm not suggesting any particular answer. I just would like us to think differently. For instance, this bathroom in a Jewish congregation, Congregation Bet Shimshat in New York, was designed. It is a gender inclusive bathroom. Well, how could that work? Well, if you have floor to ceiling doors, it can work fine. Because when you're washing your hands, it's not a problem. Okay, if you're going to adjust your hair or your lipstick or something, maybe you don't want men watching, but maybe that's not critical. Next slide. There are other ways to do it as well. This is a very innovative concept by an architect, Joel Sanders, and transgender historian Susan Stryker, and Terry Kogan, a legal scholar, that they did at the American Institute of Architects conference 2 years ago. And they said, well, let's think about dividing bathrooms into elimination areas where we need private spaces, washing areas that are sort of semi-private, and then grooming areas anywhere. And you can brush your hair anywhere. You don't have to be in a private space. And so they've tried to design a phase that might, a bathroom that might be in a very public space, that where there's visibility, people can't hide and therefore threaten you, but you can have all the privacy you need to go to the bathroom. We may have to rethink what we think about is what I mentioned earlier was the most sex segregated space in America. We may have to rethink the way our bathrooms are in order to provide safety for a segment of the gender population that is experiencing very high levels of discrimination. Next slide.
Great, thank you so much, Petra. That's a really great perspective for us to keep in mind. So here we're at the end now, and we're thinking, what can we do next? So planners, we're in a very unique position in our communities where we can champion these changes. You know, here's this image here, the same old way or a new way. If we continue down this path of doing the same things, we'll get the same results. So what can we do to incorporate these policies into our communities to make safer communities for everybody? So TSU law created 10 steps for integrating gender into policymaking process. They've laid out this handbook to incorporate gender mainstreaming into policymaking, which is something that we touch on a daily basis. Their guide is designed for people who are not gender experts. These are for everyday people who just work in policy. And it gives us the tools now to think back through these steps in how can we consider how gender may or may not be affected by what we're proposing. So this guide just gives practical guidance to translate gender mainstreaming theory into actual practice. Sherry, you want to jump in?
Yes, thank you. The European Institute for Gender Equality also provides some incredibly useful tools for U.S. planners to access that really help to provide some framework for how gender mainstreaming can be implemented. There's an important focus on methods and tools, and I think I would encourage all of you who are interested in this topic to check out those references, especially as you begin to think about how you can integrate gender mainstreaming approaches into all levels of planning, from studies to long-range plans, and really this focus on methods and looking at disaggregated data is very much highlighted in the Institute for Gender Equality's framework. More specifically, I think it's very helpful for us to look at how do we adapt some of the fairly standardized planning processes. So we need to think about how we change our approach to long-range planning process, for example. So on the left, you see planning process that's spelled out by the state of California as a resource for local governments. On the right, you see what would we need to consider at each of these steps in the long-range planning process to integrate gender mainstreaming. So in the first two stages of the planning process, visioning, engagement, and formulating goals, we need to think about engagement modalities that garner women's input. And in the case, for example, of the LA Metro, they actually had separate meetings with women. I think that's a phenomenal approach to making sure that you're garnering, encouraging, and identifying women's input. Assess participation by gender, ensure representation by gender, and summarize opinions, needs, and desire by gender. All of these approaches would be highly applicable in the early stages of a planning process. And then in the existing conditions stage of a planning process, a major focus on collecting and analyzing data disaggregated by gender. And so very important to ensure that we have all of the relevant data disaggregated by gender. Refining the goals, alternative analysis. If we understand current behaviors, current condition by gender, that will help us better understand how our future alternatives may impact men and women. In the plan adoption and implementation stages, we should ensure that the preferred alternative does not have disparate impacts to one gender over another, and that our preferred alternative, in fact, identifies and addresses gender imbalances that we caught during the existing conditions phase. And then finally, implementation, very important. We've seen a lot about specific design, say, of bathrooms or bicycle infrastructure. We need to ensure that the design and implementation does not have result in a disparate impact to one gender. So our ongoing monitoring and evaluation also should be organized and structured in a way where we're collecting disaggregate data. Next.
All right, great. Thank you so much. That ends the presentation portion here. If the attendees have any questions, now's the time. I'm putting up a slide here with the panelists and their contact information. And next, I'll put up a slide with some resources from some of the topics that we discussed today.
You. So again, type those questions in the chat box. If it's for a particular panelist, just make sure that you stay so. The first question is, I would love to start incorporating gender mainstreaming into our planning documents. So related to that, what is the best way to approach our elected officials and decision makers? Are there other examples beyond LA Metro of what other communities are doing? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I would add that there's a recent study done by NYU that showed and tried to calculate the transportation cost burden on women. And so definitely the LA Metro is a wonderful example of how to structure a study so that we're understanding differences experienced by men and women. This NYU study also does a great job of showing that women are experiencing disproportionate burdens because of behavior modifications they have to make to stay safe on transit. So I think those are two good places. There are references also at the end of this presentation that I think would be useful. Those are largely European examples. And then the recent Planning Advisory Service memo, very recent information bulletin on integrating gender mainstreaming into U.S. planning practice.
We're getting a lot of questions in on best practices or other cities that are incorporating gender mainstreaming in folks are looking for examples on how to incorporate it. Can we speak to that for a little bit?
I would offer that, unfortunately, and it was very much reflected in the responses of the 400 people we have online here, 73% had not heard of gender mainstreaming. So that's a real red flag. The planning profession is not tuned into this. And so I don't think, unfortunately, there are many good examples across the US. I think we will have more luck looking to European cities. Cities that are coming to mind, the city of Vienna, Austria, is very well known for integrating and producing best practices for planning in the built environment. The cities in Sweden, I would recommend, but maybe that's a nice follow-up to this presentation, is that we could create a kind of clearinghouse of best practices for US cities and planners in our cities, so that we can really begin to think about, what's step one? How do we start this in motion?
And I would just jump in that the Europeans are way ahead of us, and that's partly because the European Union mandated it following what, as Sherry laid out earlier, the United Nations, and so it does take some buy-in from higher level authorities, except in the case of LA Metro, I believe that was more of a bottom-up thing. And so, there's sort of two ways to do it. You can do it through a mandatory process from, a buy-in that we should be doing this because the UN or the European Union says we should, or you can get organized and work with other planners in your area and do some of the sort of stealth work of tracking women, and then begin producing reports to say, this is what's going on, we need to take this into account. But we are behind, substantially behind.
Yeah, so I agree, or rather you're right in the sense that the study was a bottoms-up approach, but I think it's not a coincidence that our board is very supportive of the women's issues, and the LA County Board of Supervisors also has a women's initiative at their agency. So I think it's got to work both ways, bottom up and top down, and also awareness, because if nobody knows that a problem exists, then we're not going to try to find solutions for it.
Are you aware of any comprehensive plans that specifically address gender?
Can you repeat that question?
Are any of you aware of any comprehensive plan that actually addresses the term, or what it means, of gender mainstreaming?
I unfortunately am not. but I would not say my research is exhaustive. But in the research I have done, I have not found LA Metro and the NYU study were the closest, most exciting pieces I found, unfortunately.
But I would just add, if anybody on the call today has a comprehensive plan that their city has enacted that does address gender mainstreaming or gender issues, I just encourage you to make a note of that in this webinar and any responses, because we'll collect that and we'll be able to provide additional resources and link to your materials if that's something that your city does do.
Thank you. There's a couple people that are commenting on the term gender mainstreaming itself as jargony and kind of off-putting or confusing to understand. In the European countries that you were speaking about, what do they call it? And is there a reason why why we're calling it gender mainstreaming? You know, I'm thinking about the polling that we did at the beginning of today's session and thinking, well, maybe people really actually are incorporating some of this logic into plans and culture, but they don't realize it because of the term gender mainstreaming and not understanding that jargon. Can we speak to that for a moment?
All of the research I did on how this is rolling out in Europe, the documents are published in English. It would be very interesting to look, say, in French, what is the actual word used, to look, say, in Spanish, in Italian, how, what's actual language being used in the other non-English language, but I have not done that. And I understand the criticism that it sounds jargony, and that in the US, maybe we kind of ignite our planning movement using different terminology. I mean, maybe that's a first step, is to name this approach, this policy strategy approach, and we could name it in our own language. I think that would be a really strong thing. Maybe in LA Metro, I'm not sure if that language was used or not, but you really literally, you don't see gender mainstreaming used very much. And I understand the comment that it could be off-putting.
No, we didn't use that term, and I really didn't even know what it meant before kind of getting looped into this panel. But you know, to us, it's really like an equity issue, and I know that's how you all see it too. But we didn't have a name for it. I guess we just wanted to understand more about the differences and the needs of women, because we just realized that planning for ever has been gender neutral, and that it really, maybe unintentionally, but it serves the purposes of men more so than women.
And I would just like to jump in and say, I think in the European context, the reason why gender mainstreaming has maybe caught on is that many cities had a woman's office, an office for women's issues, off to one side, ignored for the most part, maybe given a little bit of money, you take care of the women. And so the idea of gender mainstreaming is to say, no. We all have gender. We have to bring gender issues to every piece of work that we do, as Dr. Ryan talked about at the beginning of the presentation, because it's very important. And so the idea of mainstreaming is bringing gender into the main flow of the work that we're doing. That said, and so that's how I've always understood it, and it's widely used in the English literature. The English planners and the European planners at AICP, the Association of European Schools of Planning, talk about gender mainstreaming all the time. but Americans probably have to reinvent it. When we bring a film from Europe here, we often rename it because we like to name things ourselves. So I invite all of you to think about, what would we name this, bringing gender into much higher visibility, much higher impact, and really taking into account, in Claudia's terms, how do we be responsive to gender and gender differences and gender inequality in everything that we do? I don't have the word for it yet, but perhaps one of you do.
I want to get to one more question here before we close up shop. I'm seeing a lot of questions come in. I think people are trying to grab at something that they can't reach. The idea of linking this equity, gender mainstreaming issue to physical planning. So, you know, outside of tangible things like uh, in buses, and the bathrooms that we just talked about, what are other ways that we should be attempting to hit this topic in our everyday planning practice?
Well, one example, I teach a class called Gender in the City, and in my other classes, I always ask questions about, I often teach late afternoon, early evening. In the wintertime, it gets dark. I always ask, who's comfortable walking back to their car at 7 o'clock at night? Almost everybody is. I ask, how comfortable are you at 9 o'clock at night? And about half the people are. And when I say at 11 o'clock at night, the only people who raise their hands are men. So that suggests there's gendering happening in terms of how we navigate from our workplace to our parking lots or parking garages. There's an issue that's gendered, but you have to ask the question in the right way to hear the response. Now, men are equally liable to be waylaid by somebody mugging them, but women are fearful and will change their behaviors accordingly. Maybe that's because they're smart, but it also means they are constrained in their ability, perhaps, to take a late night class. So how can we make better lighting, better? We have a system of blue lights on campus. Many universities do, where there's a phone and a special light where you can call the local police department. That's an example. The issue is, so there are physical design elements that are highly gendered, but you have to ask, you have to look, and you have to see how men and women are using spaces differently. Parks are highly gendered. I mean, look at go to a park where there's a basketball court. If the basketball court is the center of the park, guess who's there? And if there's a park that has a swing set and sort of the whole play set for younger kids, who's there? Now, there are some men who take their kids to the park, but I would imagine that it's often women. And then how are even young boys and young girls playing together? The young boys may be wanting to kick soccer balls, throw footballs or baseballs, and how does that affect the way that girls can use the park? Well, if you begin thinking about this gender as a variable that we should be considering, you begin to see lots of places where there are differences, and then you have to ask yourself, can we do something about that? Can we create an area that's separated for the boys to play their ball games and for the girls to play however they wish to play? That would be my take on it. There's a lot of things that are gendered, but we don't stop to think and look at it and consider, how does this affect people? How does this affect people's daily lives? Transportation, bathrooms are easy because we all have to move through the city and we all have to pee, but there are a lot of other ways in which this is affected as
well. I would reiterate.
It's a little under 2:30, so we have to wrap up. Did someone want to make a final comment? I think I heard someone chiming in real quick. No? Okay. Okay. I believe I saw in a chat function, is it Sherry? I think her email address was not
Correct.
listed correctly.
Yes.
Okay.
Her email, so Sherry's email is sryan@sdsu.edu. And that'll be corrected. And when this is all posted to APA Ohio's website, all that information will be corrected.
So as Caitlin said, this presentation will be available as a PDF on the Ohio on our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planning webcast. And we've also recorded this session, and I'll be posting it up on our YouTube channel here shortly. And that's youtube.com/planning webcast. So thanks to all of our panelists and Caitlin and the Women in Planning Division for hosting today's session. I think there were a ton of questions that started coming in. So this conversation is really just starting. So I hope to have you all back again soon so we can continue this conversation. Again, thanks to all of our panelists and for all of you listening in. And we will talk next time. Have a great weekend, everyone.
All right. Thank you. Bye.